Today's guest is Jeremy Keith. Jeremy is a designer, developer, and speaker. He is co-founder of Clearleft, a design agency based out of Brighton, England. Jeremy is a web standards advocate and a prominent figure in the web design community. He's going to talk about his experience of public speaking, running conferences, and much, much more. But first, let's get to know more about Jeremy Keith. Welcome to the show, Jeremy. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me, Caesar.
Yeah, absolutely. For the folks that don't know about what you do, can you give us a little brief introduction?
To be honest, I don't really know myself what I do. I mean, I can tell you what I used to do. It was, things used to be more straightforward. It's like I was a web designer / developer. I was a freelancer, for a few years, and then ended up doing more front end development than anything else. The HTML and CSS and the JavaScript stuff. But these days, I don't know. I mean, I do some of that, particularly on personal projects. My own website, and I've got some other side projects I run. Where I also do some back end programming, but I'm a complete hacker at that. It's not my thing. But in terms of day to day work, it's become quite a mishmash of a little bit of that. Then there's speaking and teaching and running workshops and stuff like that. And then there's preparing our own conferences. So I work at this agency, Clearleft. I'm one of the co-founders of the agency.
Yeah, we're definitely going to talk more about that, your speaking and the conferences.
Yeah, and so my time these days is kind of a mixture of speaking, writing, and sometimes actually coding.
And I have have this right here, which has been very helpful for me.
Glad to hear it.
I consider myself still a sort of entry-level, intermediate web guy. I'm not an advanced web designer by any means, and this has been very, very helpful. Very cool.
Good.
How did you get into web design? What were you doing before that?
I was selling bread.
Really?
I was selling, so I got into web design through music as opposed to through bread. I was living in Germany in the 90s, and to begin with, I was just playing music on the street, busking. And then I got a job in a bakery selling bread, but I was also playing in a band. And in this band, we decided we should have a website, because that's what everyone else seemed to be doing, is mid to late 90s. And I said, well, I'll give it a go. I'll see if I can figure out how you make websites, and ask for some help from an old friend from our college, who I remembered. He was in the States, and I remember that he's doing something with computers. So I asked him how you make websites, and I thought he was going to tell me, I'd need some expensive piece of software like Photoshop or something. And he was like, well, you open up a text editor and you type, less than, and then H1 and then greater than. And it was, it was old school HTML. And I was doing, the graphic design, as it was called back then as well. But that clearly wasn't my strong point. Although actually, the website for the band turned out okay for the time. This would have been 1997, 98.
Wow. And
I think it still looks okay for that time. I've got a copy of it somewhere on my hard drive. But that was just on the side, and still selling bread by day. But I started doing that web stuff more and more on the side, because other people were asking me, oh, can you make a website for my band and I'll pay you? I was like, wow, you can get paid for doing this? That's pretty cool. So eventually I started doing more and more of the web stuff, and I was able to literally give up the day job towards the end of my stay in Germany, and then ended up moving to Brighton in 2000. And that turned out to be a really good move, like as a web nerd, because there's a really good scene in Brighton, and there always has been. So that worked out really well. Now I was freelancing in Brighton for a few years, going into different companies. And then around 2005, myself and some friends decided we'd form a company.
Nice.
That was me and Andy Budd and Richard Rudder. We'd all been blogging for a few years about web standards and all that kind of stuff. and sort of realized that, the three of us together could accomplish more than the three of us separately. So I was a freelancer anyway. I was, didn't matter that much to me. They had jobs that they had to pack in, so it was more of a risk for them, I think. But yeah, we started Clearleft, and slowly grown over the years. Although growth was never our mission. We never wanted to, grow for the sake of growing. But it's been almost 10 years of Clearleft, and like I say, my job these days is not the same as it would have been at the beginning. It's just kind of all over the place now. But yeah, that's how I got started, and that's how I ended up where I am today.
So you're originally from Ireland.
That's right. Yeah.
Right. And so you moved to Berlin for music.
It wasn't Berlin. It was actually in the Black
sorry,
Forest.
Berlin. I keep thinking Berlin. Sorry about that. What part?
No, it was as far away from Berlin as you could get. Actually, the whole time I lived in Germany, I never once made it to Berlin. I've been to Berlin since, since moving back to England. But so grew up in Ireland. Went to art college in Ireland for a little while, and then dropped out before they could kick me out.
What were you studying?
It was fine art. So
nice.
It's pretty old school kind of art college. Yeah, so oil painting. That kind of stuff. But I wasn't very good at all. So they would have kicked me out before too long, but I didn't give them the satisfaction. I dropped out before they could kick me out. And then I just bummed around. It's like, in retrospect, it's like I was waiting for the web to come along. It's like, just like, well, now what do I do? And I'm just, living on the dole in Ireland and playing music on the street and bumming around, and ended up in Germany, through various means. Ended up in this town in the Black Forest, and that's where I ended up meeting my wife, and that's where I ended up starting to do web stuff. So when Ireland, Germany, England, that's been the trajectory.
And why the move to Brighton from Germany?
So by this is about 2000, and I'd been living in Germany about 6 years, I want to say, all in all. And the singer in our band, the band that I made the first website for, he's English, and he decided, he had a bit of a midlife crisis, and decided he had to go back to university, he had to study, and he didn't want to do it in Germany because it takes years to finish in Germany. So he was going back to the UK. And we're like, fine, well, I guess that's the end of the band then. But he ends up going to the University of Sussex, which is just outside Brighton. And he's sending us emails saying, actually, this is a pretty cool place. You should come check it out. Come over for a visit. And myself and Jessica, my wife, we were getting pretty bored with Germany anyway at this point. It was there's some things were just driving us crazy about living in Germany. So we'll check it out, and we went for a visit. Like, actually, this is a pretty cool place. And we just ended up moving to Brighton, which, like I said, turned out to be, so it was kind of just happenstance that we moved to Brighton, but it turned out to be a really good move in terms of, a place in the UK to be a web designer, be a web developer.
So even then in 2000, was there a really strong web community? I mean, there's a gigantic web community now. Was it? Yeah,
surprisingly, there was. Even though, it was early days, when I got to Brighton, there was already this mailing list, the Brighton New Media mailing list. So it was just anybody involved with anything, vaguely techie. And there would be meetups, just self-organized. Someone would go, well, let's all meet and discuss web stuff, on Wednesday night. And that was pretty unusual. This is back, 2000, 2001. That was pretty unusual back then. So even from the start, there was always a lot of small agencies and freelancers. There was never like one big company, because if you were a big company, you'd be in London. You wouldn't be in Brighton. But it was a lot of medium to small size companies, and that's quite a healthy thing for a community, I think, to not have these big, behemoth agencies, but lots and lots of small agencies and sole traders. So Brighton always had a good web scene.
Yeah, and that tight-knit feeling, it just really makes a difference.
There's also this great sort of cross-pollination of worlds. Like I remember many years ago sitting on the beach and discussing something to do with, this must have been 2004, 2005, and I'm discussing something to do with Ajax and accessibility or something. And there's a friend of mine who's in the Flash world, and I don't know anything about Flash, it's a completely different world, but he was able to tell me stuff that I didn't know about. I was able to tell him stuff he didn't know about, and we were able to, cross-pollinate some ideas and throw ideas around and collaborate on potential, ways of solving problems. There's always been this good mix of different things. It's been good.
Very cool. So Jeremy, you got into web design. You've been doing it for years, and then how did your career shift from being a web designer to now becoming a speaker? What happened? How did that all go about? A speaker at events and conferences and whatnot.
Yeah, kind of by accident, as most of these things go. I mean, actually, my very, very first time getting up and speaking to people about web design was one of these local events organized through this mailing list. We're just like, hey, can you just come along and go through your portfolio, talk about websites you've built? And I was like, okay, I'll do that. And I really enjoyed it, and people seemed to like it as well. So it's like, okay, that's cool. And then, actually, my coworker Andy Budd, he used to organize an event back in the day called Skill Swap, where you'd have people, do kind of a workshop, I guess, on stuff. So myself and Richard Rudder did a workshop this time on JavaScript and manipulating the DOM. But this would have been 2004, maybe even 2003. It was a long time ago. And in the pub afterwards, I remember Andy saying to me, you should write a book about that. You should write a book about that. You should write a book about that. I was like, okay, fine. I thought it was a crazy idea, because who's going to want to read that book? But that's how I ended up writing my first book, DOM Scripting.
Yeah.
Which came out 2005. Which turned out, I got very lucky with the timing of that. It was just the right time. That a lot of web designers felt comfortable with HTML. They felt very comfortable with CSS, but they felt like they didn't know anything about JavaScript. They ignored it for years. And so it was just the right time to have a book like that. And then once you've written a book, then people want you to speak at conferences as well. But the first sort of proper public speaking thing was actually at South by Southwest in 2005. And this was when
have you been to the States before that?
I've been to the States, yes, but it was my first time going to South by Southwest. I mean, for years, I'd been reading blogs, and people would go, particularly, bloggers would go to South by Southwest and talk about how amazing it was. It was like their tribe coming together, It's like,
wow.
All these bloggers I've been reading for years, Derek Poisek and Jason Kottke and Jeffrey Zeldman, all these people. It sounded like they would just have the best time at South by Southwest. Because by the time I got there in 2005, all those people were saying, it's not as good as it used to be. It used to be so much better. It's good.
It seems like a lot of people are saying that more and more as the years go on, too.
And now I say that. Now if you ask me about South by, no, don't go to South by Southwest. It's awful. It's so big. It's terrible. But in 2005, to me, it seemed amazing. And back then, it was one corner of one floor of the convention center in Austin was the interactive South by Southwest. And so myself and Andy Budd had put in a talk, how to bluff your way in CSS. That was our talk time. Tongue-in-cheek talk. And it's just this little room. It really was not a big room. But it got packed out, and it was really strange because the people in the room were like, well, it's Jeffrey Zeldman, and there's, Jason Santamaria and all these people. So it was the weirdest thing, and, kind of a scary prospect. But it was good fun. That was my first proper talk. And then later that year, it was the first conference in the UK. I don't just mean the first one that I spoke up, like the first web conference ever in the UK was this one called At Media that this guy Patrick Griffiths put on. He put his own money into it.
When was this? What year?
This was 2005. This was like summer of 2005. At this point, there'd been, in terms of web standards conferences in the world, there'd only really been one in Australia, which was Web Essentials, what later became Web Directions. And this is not just the first one in London, but the first one in Europe. Huge risk for this guy to put it on.
And this is his own money.
His own money he put into it, yeah. So, a whole bunch of us agreed to speak at it. And that was a really good experience. Because all the other talks, it was 2005, but this time most people were actually on board with, using CSS and all this. And most of the talks were about CSS. And I was like the token JavaScript guy. I was like, what's he doing on the line? What JavaScript? We don't want to know about JavaScript. So it's kind of like, if not a hostile crowd, then just like an uncaring crowd. But there was so much to learn about JavaScript at that time that people didn't realize, how far it had progressed. That I had this wonderful experience of almost seeing light bulbs going on over people's heads. It was like, look at this, you can do this, you can do that. And people were like, oh, wow, I had no idea. And it's not very often you get that, especially not these days. at web technologies to be able to introduce an audience to something they had no idea existed. Of course, nowadays, it's complete opposite. Everything is JavaScript, right? JavaScript's eating the world, but back then it was very much the minority. So that was a really good experience, and I really enjoyed it. Really enjoyed that feeling of being able to share something. I mean, for me, public speaking is a lot about just geeking out. Like, I'm really excited about something, and I really want to share this. And instead of boring people in the pub, who don't care about this, maybe it's better to be standing on a stage and sharing it with a bunch of people who've, paid money to hear about this kind of stuff. So, yeah, I just got a real kick out of public speaking, which is funny because I talk to a lot of people and even including people who do public speaking who say that it terrifies them. They do public speaking in spite of the fact that they're terrified by it. But for me, I have to admit, I've never really had that problem. It's always been enjoyable and fun thing to do. I feel kind of guilty about that, gosh, I feel bad for these people.
Yeah, what do you recommend for the person that is really terrified of speaking in front of a crowd of whatever, on whatever subject? Do you have any pointers based on what you've learned from your colleagues, people that you do these speaking gigs with? What have you seen that works for them that might work for anyone else? Yeah,
because I'm the worst person to ask because I can't really relate to the problem that much, right? Because I'm like, you just get up and talk and it's fun.
But have you seen any of your any other person go up there that's just completely terrified? I have actually, beforehand to prepare.
Yeah, I know some people who are great speakers, but who are absolutely terrified going up there. And they always deliver a great talk, and you would never know unless you've been talking to them beforehand how nervous they were. But other people have been sharing some great tips. There's a podcast called Ladies in Tech, a website called Ladies in Tech.
Val Head and
Val and Jen. And, they're getting people on to just share these kind of tips and things that I wouldn't have thought of. Like, a lot of people are saying things like, well, try and get to the venue early or the day before, just so you can walk around on the stage. So you can picture what it's going to be like when you're on the stage. And to me, I was like, oh, okay, I guess wouldn't make a difference to me, but I can understand how if you're scared, that really helps, get you into the mindset of picturing it. And there's all things about being prepared. Obviously, that matters a lot, and you want to minimize the technical difficulties. But yeah, I'm not a good person to ask for advice. I don't think I'm the right person to ask about.
Oh, that's totally cool. But what do you do to prepare for your talks? What are the key things that you do beforehand?
So again,
and how far in advance do you prepare too?
I'm not endorsing this way of preparing. So there's the way you're supposed to prepare, and then there's the way I actually prepare. And this is actually kind of similar to writing as well. I'm not saying this is good. I'm saying this is how it ends up happening with me. I'll have the things I want to say, and what I should do is, get them down in some kind of note form, maybe Post-its, blah, 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 and, start structuring that, blah, blah, blah. What I actually do is I keep them all in my head, which is the worst place to have them.
Oh, man.
Just circling around. And then I just pace, and I'll be like distant. My wife always knows when I'm preparing a talk because I'm behaving really weirdly and just like, looking off into the distance and thinking of things and pacing up and down. And then I start building my slide deck, which is, again, not what you shouldn't do that. You should, just make a list or make some kind of just text file and move stuff around instead of diving straight into slides. So it's absolutely the wrong way to do it. And it's the same with writing. With writing, any good writer will tell you what you got to do is just make a shitty first draft, right? Just get everything down first, and then you edit and you edit and you edit, and that's how you make it good.
I completely a brain dump and then edit it all out.
Exactly. That's absolutely the right way to do it. That's not what I do. What I do is I end up, and I keep telling myself, just get it down, just get it out, just write it, and I start writing, and I think, well, no, that sentence. That's not exactly what I mean. And
you already get caught up in the...
I'm writing and editing at the same time, which is not just twice as hard. That's like exponentially harder. And I know that's not the right way to do it, but I keep doing it. And it seems the same with the talk. I'm kind of making the talk and editing the talk at the same time, when actually I should just get it down, do a run through, and then say, okay, that didn't work, and then throw things away, put in new stuff. That's not how I end up doing it. So I'm, again, not the right person to talk to, but like, how do you prepare talks? Because I think the way that I do it is not a good way. Just like, keeping it all in my head for far too long, wandering around aimlessly, and then mad panic, getting it down into some kind of keynote form. But I do start well ahead of time. In fact, sometimes, the ideas for the talk have been gestating in my head for maybe a year before I'll actually, give the talk.
Well, let me ask you this: how long does it take you what's the process? How long does it take you to put the talk together?
So it's really hard to tell because it's like...
are we talking hours, days?
Oh,
weeks?
Days.
Yeah.
At least days. Weeks. But like I said, it's not... That time isn't necessarily spent, sitting in a computer tapping on keys or moving things around. That time would be me, in the shower or walking down the street or just, sitting at a table looking into the distance. But it's still preparation for the talk because of stuff going through my head. And sometimes I will write a blog post while I'm preparing a talk that's, relevant to one particular piece of the talk. Like I'll get chunks of it down. But it's really hard to quantify exactly because it's not like I switch on a timer and say, okay, now I'm preparing the talk, and then a few hours later switch off the timer and say, now I'm not preparing the talk. It's this constant thing. So it's really, really hard for me to even give a figure for how long it's taking. I mean, the act of putting the slides together, that's probably the least part of it. That probably takes the least amount of time. But that's the one part I could actually quantify. So it's very, very hard to quantify. Too long. That's how long it takes. Too long.
So is it the same situation when it comes to setting up your conferences? Do you prepare ahead of time, or do you just kind of mash it all up at the very end before it comes up?
That's a bit more planned. No, that is more planned because so I've been in charge of doing two. The Responsive Day Out, which was initially going to be just a one-off conference, but we ended up doing a second one this year. And Deconstruct. And Deconstruct's actually been running a long time. It's been running this will be the 10th Deconstruct this year. And Deconstruct was always a more collaborative thing, but then everyone got very busy with other stuff. So decided, okay, we need one person to take on Deconstruct and do it. So for the past few years, that's been me. But that has been a bit more structured. That's more like, okay, I will have Post-it notes and I will have names, and then, start getting in touch with people in order of, preference and trying to sort of... It's a real interesting design challenge, actually, putting on a conference, because there's so many different factors you have to juggle. At Deconstruct every year we have a theme, and you want to make sure that the speakers fit the theme. At the same time, you don't want to necessarily count somebody out just because you think, well, maybe that doesn't fit the theme, right? So the theme needs to have enough leeway, be maybe vague enough to allow a bit of an outsider if you think they're a really good speaker and they should be on anyway. So there's that you have to juggle, that like the curation of having a strand running through the conference, a narrative thread. Then you've got to juggle things like, well, I don't want to have all of the speakers coming in from the United States of America. For cost reasons alone, that would be problematic. But then also just, you don't want to have a conference in England with everyone speaking with an American accent. At the same time, you don't want it to be, 10 speakers from London, right? So that's something to bear in mind. There's the diversity of backgrounds. Like don't want everybody to just be from the web world. You want to get outside perspectives. That's been one of the best things about Deconstruct, like pulling in these ideas from other places. You want to have a diversity of backgrounds of everything, really, and balancing all of that is a bit tricky. With Responsive Day Out, it was a little easier because the theme was pretty clear. It's responsive web design.
Exactly.
Certainly for the first one. So that's actually a bit easier, the conference organizing. With Responsive Day Out, it was kind of funny because there was a constraint in place because we decided we would do this one-off responsive conference last year. And we wanted to make it as cheap as possible, as in, it was going to be no frills conference, but we could try and keep the ticket price as low as possible. So we were aiming for a ticket price of just £50, which is like really, really cheap. So the constraint I put on it was, we'll only have speakers from within the United Kingdom. So there'll be no airfares to pay, right? Because that's one of the ways that the costs add up. And initially I thought, well, that's going to make it really, really hard. Like that constraint. And then I started putting all these names on Post-it notes, who we could have speak at this conference. And I realized, actually, no, there's loads just within the UK alone. So actually that first conference, even though all the speakers from within the UK, was a terrific lineup of people. And then this year, when we decided we'd do a second one, I broadened it out a little bit with some speakers from elsewhere in Europe. and one keynote speaker from the United States, which was Ethan Marcotte. Because
of course,
if you're going to have one, if you're going to fly in one person from the States. But it was really good fun. And another thing was playing with the formats for these conferences. So Deconstruct is a pretty straightforward conference format, although, half-hour talks, so they're not enormous.
Is it long. Now, is it session after session, back-to-back?
Yeah, one track. I'm very much a firm believer in the one-track model. So, I really like event apart. I don't like being forced to choose between two tracks, especially when they do designer developer tracks. I really don't like that. So, but with Responsive Day Out, we tried this really interesting thing, which a lot of people said they really liked it. So we kept it for the second year, which was the talks were really short, like 15 to 20 minutes short, but we'd have three of them back to back, boom, 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 like so. Three
before
20-minute
a break.
Talks. Well, we'd have them back to back, and then instead of going straight to a break, we bring all three speakers back on stage, and then we have it like a chat show with me for another
like a Q&A.
15 minutes, and I kind of handle the questions from the audience, and also got questions of my own that have come up, during the talks. And so it's kind of like a little bit of a chat show. So it's like 3 back-to-back short talks followed by short Q&A and then a break. And so by having 4 of those throughout the day, you manage to squeeze in 12 speakers, and it goes really fast. Like everyone said by the end of the day, it's like, wow, I can't believe how fast everything was, because the pace is so fast. So you manage to squeeze in a lot with that, and it for the speakers as well, it's a bit of a challenge. Like they have to get straight to the point. Like they have to cover one topic in 20 minutes. You can't have this big epic sprawling talk. It's kind of like when I do talks, they're just sprawling all over the place and like going everywhere. Like that wouldn't work. That wouldn't work. It's got to be one focused thing. You don't even have time to say who you are, what you do. Just get straight down to it. And I like that because, I go to a lot of conferences, and I think I have a short attention span. So I want people to be like giving me boom, boom, boom. Give me the facts. Get straight down to it. So that's been interesting as well. Like there's so many things when it comes to conferences that you can design, I guess, right? That have an effect on the outcome, and playing around with these constraints and these parameters has been really interesting.
So are you thinking about doing something or changing it up a little bit for the following? Well, first of all, are you planning on doing another one?
Well, I wasn't planning on doing a second one, and then we ended up doing it. And then at the end of it, everyone was like, "Oh, it was great," and I totally look forward to the next one. I'm like, well, I never said there was going to be a next one, but maybe we will. I could imagine a third one, but that's it, like a trilogy.
Really?
Yeah, no,
a trilogy. I love that.
Trilogy. But there's no way that we should have 5 years of a responsive web design conference. Something will have gone very wrong, right? At some point, and I hope this point should be about next year, when we'll do the last one. It would just be normal. Responsive design would just be the normal way of doing things, which is kind of how it feels to me already. But it's like, I was talking about how I spoke at web standards conferences, but you don't really market a conference as being a web standards conference these days, because of course you use web standards. How else would you do it? Yeah. And I feel like responsive design needs to end up at that point, and we're getting pretty close to it. And so having a conference called Responsive Day Out, for 4, 5, 6 years that wouldn't be good. It's like there was a conference that used to run here in Brighton called Flash on the Beach. Yeah, not a great idea to have a conference, so closely tied to one particular technology. They ended up becoming reasons to be creative, so that it's not tied to that Flash thing. So a Responsive Day Out is intended as a one-off. There's been a sequel, at most one more, and that would be it. This
awesome. Are you thinking about changing up the theme the next year if it does happen?
No, I guess it would be Responsive Day Out, but this is the interesting thing. I thought about not having a second Responsive Day Out this year, but having some other day out, like, I don't know, Performance Day Out or some other aspect of.
Oh, that's really cool.
Yeah, but I think maybe we could do one more Responsive Day Out. It would have to cover things from a different angle. I don't know what that angle would be. But maybe there would then be life in this idea of, just something day out. Like the idea of having that format of really fast talks, as cheap as possible, but covering some other area. But I don't know if there's a topic that I could get as excited about as responsive design. It'd be tricky to think of something so big. Yeah.
Until that next wave comes in, right?
Yeah, whatever.
We don't know when that is.
Yeah.
Let me ask you this, since we're talking about conferences and speaking and whatnot. What For someone who is interested in doing public speaking events for something they're really passionate about, what do you recommend for them to do beforehand, so they could, I don't know, be sought out to do these talks, or something that will make them more noticeable?
Right.
As incorrect? No, I'm kidding.
No, right as in write down your thoughts. I mean, writing is a way for you to structure your ideas. It's a way for me to structure my ideas. And so, I mentioned it was, after writing a book that people were asking me to speak, which is kind of a bit silly because it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be a good speaker. But just writing blog posts is enough. I mean, for Responsive Day Out, I was asking people to speak who had never seen speak. And actually, some of them had never done any public speaking at all. Responsive Day Out was their first time ever doing any public speaking. But I'd been reading their blog posts. And they had great ideas and great thoughts. And so writing about whatever that thing is that you're really passionate about, just write it. And don't be worried about, the audience.
Spelling and
just get it
grammar
out there. And don't worry about, trying to get it to the widest audience. The audience will find it. You just need the one right person to find it, and they'll share it with their friends, and the right people will find it. But just getting your ideas down. Like I said, there's a lot of similarities between speaking and writing. You've got to craft this. You got it all in your head, but how do you explain it to somebody else? Writing is going to be the best way of doing that. So that's my advice. Number one advice, write. In fact, even if you have no interest in public speaking, please write anyway. I just think everyone should write. Everyone has something to contribute. That's the other thing. Do not listen to that voice in your head that says, "Oh, no one's going to be interested in this," or "This isn't anything new. Somebody else knows this." And you may even get shitty comments from people saying, "Well, everybody knows this already. I don't know why you're writing this down."
Exactly. That's already a concept from 3 years ago.
Yeah, right. Ignore that, because that doesn't matter as long as there's that one person who reads what you've written and goes, "Oh, I didn't know that. Oh, you've explained that really well." I remember, when I was got converted to CSS in 99, 2000, like the Web Standards Project, and I switched to using CSS for layout instead of tables, and I was really evangelical about it. And then by about 2001, 2002, I was like, okay, I've done it. I was moving on to other things like JavaScript. Yeah, but Andy Budd, he was just beginning to discover this idea of CSS. So he started learning it, and he was asking me for advice. And he would blog as he was learning. And he would write a blog post about something that I would read and go, well, why would you write that down? That seems so obvious, right? To me, it seemed like, well, everyone knows that, right? And then I see the comments like, no, everyone does not know that. Everyone does not know that, and they were really, really grateful he'd written it down. And he became a CSS expert, not because he learned CSS and then wrote about it, but he wrote about it as he learned it, which is what I ended up doing with the JavaScript as well. Because I think it's actually very hard when you're an expert in something to remember what it was like not to know something. So sometimes, experts who know everything about a subject are not the best people to be teaching it, because they can't get into that frame of mind to know what it was like not to know it. So as you're learning something, which is surely going to be, the time when the voice in your head is going, well, everyone else already knows this, that's the ideal time to be writing it, right? So if you're just learning, I don't know, SAS now, write about it as you learn it, because that perspective is really, really valuable. And as someone who's an expert in SAS, probably wouldn't be able to write from that perspective.
Would you say that someone that's an expert in SAS would be interested in reading someone's blog posts while they're learning SAS?
I think that perspective is hugely valuable for them as well. They can say, "Oh yeah, I forgot that's," or they see, "Wow, I didn't think that was an important aspect, but it's clearly hugely important when you're learning it." So yeah, it's absolutely valuable to write, no matter what skill level you're at, what stage of discovery you're at. In fact, I would say the earlier the better. So it's really important not to listen to that voice in your head that says, "Oh, no one's going to be interested in this," or "Everyone knows this already." That doesn't matter. It's like there's this one person out there who's going to be so happy they found what you write. When I write on my blog, I deliberately don't think about anybody else reading it. Or I think about there's one person out there reading it who's just like me, but who hasn't found this thing I just discovered. So that's why I'm sharing it. That's why I'm writing about it, because that one person out there who's very similar to me might want to read it. And so when I write my blog, I write very freely and very easily because I'm not thinking that anyone's ever going to read it. That's the complete opposite when I'm writing a book. And the book writing thing is just horrible because the pressure is like, well, it's going to be written in paper and people are going to read it and they're going to judge you. And it's like the pressure. As soon as there's a deadline, as soon as there's like other people are actually expecting you to write this, I just freeze and I clam up and I get like suddenly writing becomes this really, really difficult thing for me. Whereas on my blog is like this escape. My blog is this place where it's like, well, I can write whatever I like. It's my website. I can do what I want. And I think that's the way to approach writing on your own website as well. It's like, it's for you. It's, note to self. Think of it that way. Note to self. Like, here's something on this day and this year, I just discovered this. Note to self. And in a couple of years from now, you might find that really interesting to look back on that. If it turns out to be useful for someone else, great. But just for yourself, it's really, really handy. Writing is definitely the way to go. If writing is not your thing, then some other form of publishing.
It's funny because when weblogs sort of began, people had a tendency to write these, like you said, notes to themselves, right? Just like a brain pour of whatever they were thinking, their situation, certain experiences and whatnot. That's what it sort of started with.
Yeah, and I think there's a tendency a lot of time to see the blogs like as if you're writing for a magazine, you're writing for an actual publication.
Yeah, so let me just tell you from my experience, I rarely write anything, and the reason why is because I stop myself from just starting. And why is this? Because I see so many other blogs, different well-written pieces from other people, and I'm just like, you know what? There's just no way. There's no way.
Yeah, so you basically end up self-censoring. You're like, I was going to write this thing, but now I don't think I can do it because it's not going to be as good as this person or that person, or it's not going to be the right length. Like, people seem to think it has to be an article. Like, it's not enough to just jot something. Yeah, it has to be this article length thing, and that's you just got to ignore those voices and just go, this is for me, and just throw it out there.
Yeah, it's a good way to see it. You touched a little bit about when you're creating a book, when you're starting to write a book, that you go through these hurdles, these roadblocks. How do you surpass that? How do you get past that and continue and finally just finish writing that book?
Blind panic. Like, there's some date I'm supposed to have a certain amount written by, and the date is creeping closer, and I haven't written anything, and then I just... Blah. So again...
What is it, sleepless nights?
Yeah, sleepless nights and worry and biting of fingernails and general anxiety. It's not good. I wish I didn't have that. And like I said, it's so strange because when I'm writing, my own blog or something, I don't have any of that. It's absolutely like, I'm just going to throw this thing out there. But as soon as there's the pressure of it's a real thing, I have that. I've heard other people, who write who have the same issues, and they will do something like they'll start an email to a friend. Who's like, I'm trying to write this, and what I'm trying to say is, and then they describe what they're trying to say, and of course,
it becomes a whole chapter.
Yeah, don't send the email. Just copy and paste what you've just described. There you go. That's the chapter you were trying to write.
That's kind of funny because I've heard other people say that whenever they're recording, for instance, a video, an instructional video, or when they're speaking in front of people, one thing, and this is just me hearing it out on the web or watching it, is that they would picture a friend who has the same question that they're about to answer, in the audience, and just talking one-on-one. So maybe that's another way.
Or are you familiar with the programming idea of rubber ducking?
No, I'm not.
Okay, so rubber ducking is that you keep a rubber duck on your desk, and that when you're stuck on a problem, you take out the rubber duck and you speak to the rubber duck. And you explain to the rubber duck what the problem is. And the act of talking through the problem usually is enough for you to figure out the solution to the problem. So I've done this where I'll say to the other front-end developers at Clearleft, because I don't do that much of it myself, and they're the ones actually doing the work. And I say, look, anytime you want to rubber duck with me, that's fine. In other words, You can come to me and like, just feel free to tell me the problem you're having. And the act of, I won't have a solution for them, but the act of them saying it, is enough to, to figure out the solution. And we'll have like, just front end powwows. We get together to talk through stuff, and the act of talking through it. And actually, when I'm writing a book, I totally use my wife as the rubber duck. I'm really sorry about this, but I'm going to have to talk to you now about JavaScript just for 10 minutes.
How does she react to that?
She's very understanding and very kind, and yeah, very supportive of it, and sometimes genuinely interested. She's a linguist, so there's programming languages and language itself. There are some connections, and some of the concepts that I get obsessed by, have relevance for her. But yeah, this idea of having more of a one-on-one conversation instead of this idea that you're broadcasting to the masses, and that's frightening, and that's going to make you freeze up. So you got to try and hack your brain into thinking that, oh no, this is just a one-on-one conversation.
Yeah, very cool. Jeremy, I always ask this question. Want to know if there are any books that you refer to and help you out with anything. I mean, it could be with your work, speaking, or generally something that you like to read that you would recommend for other people to check out.
So I generally try to alternate between fiction and nonfiction. Like read a fiction book and then read a nonfiction book. I like a lot of popular science books. And I read a lot of science fiction. In fact, lately I haven't been doing much of the nonfiction. I've been just reading a lot of science fiction, which I think is valuable.
Cool. Yeah, definitely.
Think about the future. But in terms of, I guess, more relevant stuff to me, something I've recommended quite a bit is George Orwell. Not so much his novels.
1984.
Well, also his nonfiction.
I mean, that's...
Yeah, no, 1984 is great. All of George Orwell's work is great. I've read everything he's ever written. But his nonfiction essays are fantastic in terms of, what we've just been talking about, how to write, how to get your ideas down and craft them. There's a couple of essays, and they're short, they're quick reading. There's one called Politics and the English Language, and there's another called Why I Write. Both very, very similar, very related. And just a lot of very good advice in there about writing. I would say also would apply to speaking or any kind of, sharing of ideas or sharing of information. So those essays, I think, would have had an influence on me. I'd hope they've had an influence on me. And lots of science fiction, basically. I just read a lot of it. Because I find it quite thought-provoking, the ideas, yeah. I
mean, there are complete different worlds, different languages, different...
Yeah.
I see the relation here.
Yeah, and like I said, the non-fiction stuff as well. There's a lot of, popular science stuff that I find relevant. There's a great book called The Victorian Internet by Tom Standage, which is about the telegraph. And he's a journalist for The Economist, and he was basically looking at the telegraph and sort of comparing its arrival to the arrival of the internet, and people made the same kind of claims about how it was world-changing technology. There was the same moral panics about how it was destroy civilization. Really,
like a Y2K of the era.
Yeah, more or less. Yeah. So I find that interesting. That that's more of a historical thing than a future thing. I spend so much of my time reading more futuristic or near future things. It's really interesting to read historical. But yeah, I mean, just being a guy who does stuff on a computer, obviously I've been, influenced by Neil Stephenson and William Gibson, right? Reading Neuromancer and Snow Crash and all that stuff. I'm a geek, so that stuff is bound to have had an effect on me.
No, those are great recommendations. If there's one key piece of advice that you would give to someone that wants to just dive into anything, something that they're completely new at, I've mentioned a lot of about speaking, public speaking, a lot about, we talked some about conferences. What would that piece of advice be?
So it's funny because my friend Dan Maul asked me this a while back. He was asking my feedback on public speaking. He's a great public speaker, and we were out at dinner. He's saying, Jeremy, if you had one piece of advice, public speaking, and I said, Dan, the key is sincerity, because once you can fake that, you've got it made. But no, in seriousness, seriously though, I don't know. Just do it. I think you can't always expect instant gratification. And sometimes it's going to take time. And as long as you're not expecting the instant gratification, that's absolutely fine. So like I've been saying, you should write, right? Just start writing. And you might start doing that. And then after 6 months say, well, I'm getting nothing here. Nobody's, saying anything about my writing. Nobody's giving me any feedback. Maybe I'll just give up. But if you do it without the expectation that anybody's reading it and you just keep doing it, then before you know it, opportunities start happening when you're not expecting them. So I think that's it. I think just do it, but whatever it is, but do it without any expectation. That I'm going to do this thing and I'm going to be the world's authority on whatever that thing is. Just do it for its own sake. And the other thing is, I talked about when I speak, I'm geeking out about something I'm excited about. I think that's really important that you do what you're into. I sometimes get people asking me, what programming language should I be learning? Or what technology, what library, what framework should I be learning? And say, well, whatever's the one that makes sense to you, whatever works for you, you should not be thinking, oh, well, I'll have a better chance of getting a job if I learn technology X or technology Y. It's like, okay, that might be true for now, but then you're in a job that maybe you're not that into because you have to do technology X. And if you're not into that technology, well, now you're doing it as a living. So you will get known for doing what you do. So make sure that what you do is something you want to be known for, right? So even though it might seem like, well, this is a really niche thing and no one's going to be interested in this one, little side thing that I'm totally excited about, it's the fact that you're totally excited about it that matters, not how many people are into it. And also the internet's a big place now. So, even if you're 1 in a million, that's still a huge figure, right? There's a huge number of people. So, make sure it's something you're genuinely into and not just something you think you should be doing. Like, oh, everyone's talking about this JavaScript library or this CSS framework, so I think I should be, into that. I'm not saying don't, research those things.
Right, of course.
You need to find out whether they click with you. But the reason why you spend time with something should be because it totally makes sense to you and because you're excited about it and you wanna spend time with it.
Yeah, definitely. No, that's great. As long as you're passionate about something and you really want to talk about it, you really want to share it. I mean, that's probably the best thing to do in the first place, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So you play the bouzouki.
I do play the bouzouki.
I
yes.
didn't mention this earlier, but you're in a band and you play bouzouki. You're in a band and you play the bouzouki. How long have you been playing it?
Well, I started playing mandolin. I've been playing mandolin over 20 years, maybe 25 years. And bouzouki maybe about 20 years. And I tune it just like a mandolin. So it's like a big mandolin. It's got the scale of a guitar, but it's tuned like a mandolin. And it's interesting because so I'm into Irish traditional music, and actually the bouzouki, even though it's a Greek instrument, is quite popular in Irish traditional music. Like in the 1960s, somebody went to Greece on their holiday and came back with a bouzouki, and it fit well with the Irish traditional music. And so now you have these luthiers. Yeah, so the bouzouki I play is actually a very anglicized version of bouzouki. Like it doesn't have that round back. It's got a flat back. It's made by a guitar maker. So it's kind of its own instrument now. It's not really the Greek instrument. It's not quite the same as an octave mandolin. And then
it's kind of like a guitar tuned like a mandolin.
Yeah, it's got the range of a guitar, just about, but with the tuning of a mandolin. Yeah.
So for those of you who are not familiar with Jeremy's music, be sure to check out his stuff. I'll definitely have that in the show notes. You can find everything we talked about today here with Jeremy on pencilversuspixel.com/Jeremy Keith. So that's pencilvspixel.com/Jeremy Keith. So Jeremy, thank you so much. It's been great talking to you, and you've been giving so much information, and I love this. It was great.
Yeah, it was my pleasure. I enjoy just, rattling on for hours. So yeah.
And it's always great just listening to you talk, man.
Oh, thank you, Steve.
But thank you again, Jeremy. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today, and we'll see you next time.